Fat boys, that is week 1 in the books. It was a goodie. I think anytime you have those kinds of night games, we had an international game where people couldn't stand up for a while until they figured it out. We certainly had some games in the middle, but we had tons of injuries, not too many, just sprinkled in liberally. And we definitely had some awesome matchups coming our way in our league, with one of them actually coming down to a less than 1 point differential. So anytime that happens, you know it's a hot week. So enough from me. Let's get to some NFL highlights, and then we're going to jump to week 1 results. If I even have a chance of doing this week by week, this is probably the section I'm going to have to be the most economical time-wise with. So I'm going to go Goldilocks and the Three Bears porridge style and just give you 3 takes, one way too hot, one way too cold, and hopefully one that's just right. My too hot, and it's so hot of a take that I don't even fully believe it, but it is certainly a reaction to week 1. Offenses, or at least quarterbacks, were really bad. Epically bad. We usually have a bit of a funny start to the season. We'll get to that a little bit later. But this particular year, we only had 2 quarterbacks throw over 300 yards in the first week. But even kind of scaling that backwards, we did have this rookie class that was supposed to be phenomenal. And Caleb Williams threw for under 100. Daniels didn't throw for much, but he did run. And Bo Nix just threw a ton, but all really short passes. Other than that, the other kind of mainstays or the other kind of reported rookies did not have a good one. But sticking with our quarterbacks, just kind of to put it in reference, 32 starting quarterbacks. The only one that got really knocked out was Jordan Love at the end of the game, and he did fine, especially yards-wise. He was okay. Aaron Rodgers did sit out the last drive, which would have gotten him a few more yards. But of the 32, 17 of them, so math majors, that's more than half, were under 200 yards. As an old Spanish teacher used to say, that's not bueno at all. Horrible starts to the year for most of the quarterback, which means in our cases, tight ends and wide receivers. So who did score? You're looking mostly running backs, and actually kickers had a phenomenal week. And that's what you really sign up for fantasy for, right? Is the kickers. 19 different 50-yard plus field goals were hit this week. And there was actually, that doesn't even include the one from Dallas's Aubrey, who he did technically tie league record 66-yard field goal, but it was called back due to a penalty, and they didn't have the guts to kick a 71, because even against the Browns, I guess they felt that was too much. So who knows if this is offenses that are going to stick around, but certainly not one that we get off to. 2 teams actually won, Bears and Steelers, without scoring an offensive touchdown. So week 2, here's hoping the scores are a little bit higher. My too cold of a take, because it's not even really a take, but it's certainly something I noticed. NFL's awesome at scheduling games, pretty much. Now, number one, this is the first time I've ever been a fan of night games, because I'm actually in a place when you wake up in the morning and the night games are happening. It's actually quite nice. But the night games were all the rivalry ones that we pretty much probably wanted to see. You got the return matchups with Kansas City and Baltimore, even to an extent an NFC power matchup in Brazil with Green Bay and Philadelphia. But you've got the Goff-Stafford wife swap or quarterback swap. I know you got to be careful, especially with Stafford involved. But that game where they not only a redo of last year's playoff run, but also they both have experiences with both teams. So that rivalry game was great. Not a night game, but the Arthur Smith revenge matchup, Pittsburgh and Atlanta. So they did really match up those games to make them a little more competitive. But even on the weaker side, I read something that almost 2/3 of elimination pools were pretty much done, or at least 2/3 of people were out because they took Cincinnati to beat New England. And they shocked everything. New England probably could have only beaten 3 teams so far this year in week 1, and they picked one of them, the NFL, to make that a game. So now we have to think, are they a decent team? Tampa Bay and New Orleans looked great, but that's because Carolina and Washington probably didn't. But now we have to think, are they good, or is the other team just really that bad? So ultimately, if you can make me care about games that I really shouldn't care about, well done, NFL. You did a good job. For my just right, and this is my take pretty much every year, back when I used to live in a city where you actually could throw a little bit of money down on the first, on the actual matchups of the game or the results of the games, point spread or not. The first 4 to 5 weeks are actually really fun because the NFL odds makers haven't caught up to who's really good and really bad, and we're really going on kind of last year's records and the predictions coming in. But you can always bank on week 1 being just crazy. Thinking about it already, number 1, the best or the most coveted fantasy football player didn't even play in the Monday night game, and apparently the 49ers knew this for a while, and they just decided to keep this one to themselves. in many people's board, the number one wide receiver, and in some cases the number 2 pick overall, was arrested on his way to the game. No jokes there, not really that funny, except for he exploded and had an amazing game afterwards after saying to the officer, apparently, that he actually did want to be a cop at some day. So odd experience there, but that's just week 1, I guess. Denver had 2 safeties in the first half. You had a kickoff return, punt returns, pick sixes, unorthodox ways of teams winning. There was 4 12 or more point deficits that were made of, actually I think 14 or more point deficit games that the comebacks kind of came about in the fourth quarter. So really nothing was stable. And even probably one of my favorite little pieces in the Brazil game, if you watched the entire first half, people were falling all over the place. Apparently they couldn't get their grips. Now the US is funny. It can't really sort out a lot of political issues, but at halftime, it could certainly sort out cleats and everybody was running fine afterwards. But I think my funniest piece is knowing some of the audience and maybe the amount of Americans who probably haven't been to Brazil. Just think now of the percentage of Americans who honestly think, because they saw it, that the entire country of Brazil is just super slippery and you're going to fall everywhere. Huge matchups, great performances, and certainly some duds. But to get to the specifics of players, we're going to take a pause and we'll jump into this week's matchups. Somehow, in some way, I ended up as our top scorer this week. Don't get used to that, Fisher, because I don't know if that's going to happen all the time. Realistically, aside from my underperforming defense and my tight end not really being a tight end, but I knew that. Everyone else I'm pretty happy with. Hill was probably one of my few on the top, was my only few on the top 5. He was our wide receiver 3. Everyone else just did all right, and I definitely, if you take a look, I definitely left some points on the bench. Daniels being our quarterback 4, which, knock on wood, hopefully helps me out, considering now Love is doubtful and we don't really know, although they keep saying maybe. In terms of Will, sorry buddy, you did kind of underperform. We had a pretty epic matchup. We did our quarterbacks battling in Brazil, and it was super frustrating if you do that, because both in the first half, as I mentioned, neither team could stay on their feet, but the second half did actually give us a fair bit of more entertainment. Your running backs held you well enough. I think you wanted a bit more from them, though, and I think ultimately, especially having one in your flex, they kind of let you down. Not as much as your wideouts, though. Zay Flowers did fine. Everybody else just kind of a wet fart there. You do have some love on the bench in the running back department, and Brock Bowers. This was not a great tight end week. So to say our tight ends underperformed collectively, fair enough. Brock Bowers is actually a tight end 5 under our scoring system with only 8 points. So you would have had someone there. Either way, Will, I think you can probably snap back pretty quick here on this one. You did have some underperformances. I don't expect it to keep going that way. I actually would not have had the top score had someone made 1 sub, which I'll get to later on. But I'm happy. I'll take the win. I know this league comes down to the fine stroke, so not only the win, but the point total. Could not be happier with that. Speaking of could not be happier or could not be more upset, a .74 differential. Ouch. And he's a math teacher, so he knows how much it was. Jake, unfortunately, buddy, you've had this is kind of the battle of our dynasties, the last 2 that have won the last few years. Unfortunately for you, Rathwell started out pretty strong this year. A. Richardson was very rich in that regard, quarterback 3 overall this week. Other than that, I did mention our tight ends. Pitts, the resurgence. He was our tight end 3, and actually the top tight end, and we've already mentioned the only 2 that were in our top 5, because not everyone that scored big was something that was a tight end that people picked up. This was the battle of the kickers, pretty exceptional. This is where our top two that we started. We did not start the kicker 1 this week, which his foot lives in Pittsburgh. But also kind of crazy if you think it was Samuel and Moody left on the Monday Nighter with that 10-point lead. And if Jake was watching, he must have been sweating it, because it did, we're looking at 1 extra point more for San Francisco, and this is his. So unlucky, Jake. I think if we just take a quick snapshot of the bench, you made all the right calls. Although, technically, I guess, Mark, if you wanted to cement it, you could have put in Brian Robertson Jr. instead of Chase. But if you make that kind of move before week 1, I think you have some kind of a DeLorean sportsbook situation, and I would kind of question it. Don't know why you would make that move. But overall, not a horrible week, because for both, remember, point differential is probably, or the total point scored is going to probably add up in the end. But Mark, you're on the happy side of this. Jake, you got more work to do. Whalen, you came out of the gates pretty strong this week, the third highest point total, but more importantly, 1-0 in the win column. I think if you take a look at the bench here, you actually did leave some points on. There were Tua, but again, CJ Stroud would have been my choice too, and he didn't cost you that much. You also are someone that didn't suffer too much in the tight end department, and not as much certainly as you did in kind of the running back variety, but your wide receivers held up for you, especially some of your big guns. Wilson had an underperformance, but not anything too drastic, and Evans just goes to show every year. Why don't we just take Evans early? Why? Every year, this is the conversation. Every year he's boring, but every year he gets freaking points. Now, granted, their matchup was favorable, so let's see when he's not playing Washington, but I'm willing to bet they'll do all right. B, just kind of a stinker from start to finish for you. A Marvin Harrison, massive underperformance. You can't be happy with your wide receivers in general. After throwing some shade my way for my Olave prediction, maybe he will, but I got to say, New Orleans played Carolina. If he can't score against Carolina, I'd be a little bit concerned. Your running backs were all right. I mean, Bijan didn't rip the league apart, but I mean, he essentially is at least getting more carries, and the offense seems a little more him-centered. Pittsburgh did look like have a good D, so I wouldn't hit the panic button too fast on that one. And Walker looked great, although we have a questionable label. From what I hear, I wouldn't be too worried yet, but who knows? Things have probably changed between when I record this and when it comes out. Your light, bright spot there, Dallas, was our number 3 defense and actually the second best defense that anyone started. So that's a bright spot for you. And you did leave a lot of talent on the bench. Stevenson was someone who cracked our top 5. He was our running back 5. Worthy did not crack the top 5, but he was close, and that's all near 20 points. So you definitely have things to play with. You definitely have depth to look forward to. So the fact that you started as our second worst scorer shouldn't hold you back too much. Whalen, this is easy ground for you. That's another win. Let's see if you can make it 2 next week. Coming right behind Whalen's team is Justin's team with Whalen in the name that realistically we still have to check. It's not just me, I know it. And you went against our stinker of the week, Diggs, Chubb, and I will get to you in a second, but yowza, do you have some injury issues. Justin, well done on the quarterback. Obviously, you knew Lamar would score you well. He was our quarterback 5 of the week, and Barkley was our running back 1, and that was pretty much what you needed. Everybody else was kind of vanilla, kind of like me and the drapes right now in terms of our fashion choices. I mean, Devontae Smith was fine, but everyone else, not what you really want. But if you're going to have some people come out of the gate, you might as well have them be in the top 5. Speaking of which, you left the wide receiver 1 on your bench from Green Bay. Now, without Love, is he going to have just as good of a run? Only time will tell. You can already see the story here with Ben. Not only are you team IR, you added to that team with Puka Nacua hitting it, so he's gone for a couple weeks, so let's see what kind of moves and makes you do. Now, granted, you do have technically a receiver, not one that got a whole lot of love, so my guess is that's something you're going to want to remedy this week. Your running backs as well, I mean, they were kind of your bright spot, and Diggs being your huge bright spot, so maybe just he's been waiting for you to put him in your title of the name or title of your team all along. Burrow certainly had a stinker against New England. That's either his fault. I mean, Cincinnati never really comes out of the gate, so I'm not really sure if you're going to hit the panic button quite yet, but let's see how it goes. I have to think you're in for a bounce back. I mean, there's no way CeeDee Lamb continues to have those performances, and as long as you can get through all of your injuries, who knows, eventually you might come out the other end. In the meantime, you were our low score. Justin, you jumped on that one pretty heavily, so best luck next week, boys. Jazz, technically you were our lowest scoring winner, but let's see why. You started CMC Music Factory when you had Mason on the bench. Had you put him in, I actually think this league is tight enough. In fact, I know you would have been our number 1 scorer of the week, so that was kind of a weird flex. Kupp was our wide receiver 2, and Achane obviously was just outside. I think it was our running back 6. Now, Chicago was the defense 1, so you had to be pumped with that because everything else with Chicago was a little bit, let's say, underwhelming this week, so you're hoping for a bounce back there. And looking at your bench, you do have some love, especially you've got CMC's handcuffs, so that's something I would probably assume you're going to be playing wisely moving forward. Horst, you did have our QB1. Allen was obviously a great call there. Everybody else underperformed for you except for Monty, so even your boy Jefferson didn't really come out like the stud you were hoping for, so you're definitely going to want to bounce back next week. Similar to what I said in the last round, though, there's a couple guys here. I wouldn't hit the panic button yet on Atlanta, But who knows? What do I know? I got to think that Pittsburgh's defense might have been that good. Maybe not. We'll see how it goes. Houston's going to be tough because every week there's tons of mouths to feed, but that doesn't mean that Tank Dell isn't in for a good one next week. And obviously you might have some injury concerns with Ferguson, but you've never been a quiet GM. I don't expect making moves is something that's going to scare you off. We get into next week, it's almost like Yahoo knew what was coming because we have 2 matches of 1-0s, 2 matches of 0-1s. In fact, we have our 9 and our 10 squaring off, and actually that predicted is supposed to be quite tight here. We have our 7 and 8 squaring off, which is pretty exceptional. Now, we didn't have the 5 and the 4, the 5 and the 6, but pretty darn close. All right, so we've got another matchup here that's within about a point, another matchup here that's within about a point, and another matchup here that's about 2 points or 1.5. So aside from this 7-8 affair, which I'm sure Horst will be addressing, Yahoo said this should be a tight week, which sounds about right for a week 2. So take a look. I know the waiver wire's already been somewhat active. I would expect some good last-minute drops, so we'll see how that pans out, but looks like it could be a good one for us in week 2. With week 1 done and dusted, we're already on to week 2. I've seen the waiver wire move, so some of you are definitely making moves, although not as many as I thought. So we'll see how that works out in the next little bit. This should be coming in just before the Thursday nighter, so please pay attention to that. We got the Bills and the Dolphins, which many of us have a vested interest in due to our fantasy players. But 2 of our fantasy team names do have to do with the team itself. So my guess is people are staying up late / waking up early to watch that one. Enjoy week 2. I will probably try and send a message or 2. I'm going to be a little bit more of a bother this year just about getting in touch about the financials. But aside from that, strap yourself in for what plans to be. And if you saw the matchups, we should be getting some good ones this week. A phenomenal week 2. So best of luck, crew.